Welcome everyone for one last time to Science Policy and Advocacy for STEM Scientists certificate course.
The next person that's going to be presenting is Adam Fagen. So hopefully you don't have any issues sharing your screen. During that period, I'll introduce Adam. So Adam is the Director of Communication and Advocacy for the Association of Science and Technology Centres. This represents science and technology centres and museums around the world. In this role, he guides member organisations in advocacy at the national, state and local levels. He's previously served as an Executive Director of the Genetics Society of America, Director of Public Affairs for the American Society of Plant Biologists, and a Senior Programme Officer at the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine. Adam's first entry into policy came through his work as a graduate student advocating for best practices in doctoral training at the campus and at national levels. He's been involved in science policy in DC for more than 15 years, and Adam earned a BA in biology and mathematics from Swarthmore College and an AM in molecular and cellular biology and a PhD in molecular biology and education from Harvard. So I'm going to pass it over to Adam to talk a bit more about how he got involved with science policy. So yeah, the stage is all yours,
Adam. Thanks very much, Rosie, and I'm going to try to do this without slides, so hopefully you won't tune out entirely. So really glad to be here and reflecting back on my own experience thinking about science policy. We've come a long way, I think, in terms of having opportunities like this and establish formal programs and those kinds of things, which make it a much more clear path to figure out how to engage with that. As Rosie said in the introduction, I first got interested in policy issues when I was a grad student, and I was involved with something called the National Doctoral Program Survey 20 years ago, which seems crazy, which was kind of really a student-led effort to look about how graduate programs were actually listened to all the best practices and ideas out there about how training should happen. And it provided me an opportunity to get involved with some discussions about doctoral education at the national level, even while I was still a grad student. And I think it kind of whetted my appetite for, like, I want to help sort of change systems, not just have kind of a really hyper-local sphere of influence, but the opportunity to help sort of influence the kind of the way that things are organized so that it would have a much greater impact. And that interested me enough that after I finished my PhD, I said, well, that's kind of what I want to do. So I came to DC and as Rosie mentioned, have had a number of different opportunities to be involved with policy really in a number of different areas, from the work at the National Academies, which is really in terms of providing kind of advice in terms of authoritative reports, to working with a number of different professional societies, helping first engage individual scientists and trying to be advocates for their interests, and now working for an association of institutions that are committed to public engagement in science and really being, I think, at that nexus between the scientific community and the public, which, working with individual scientists who said, if the public only understood X, and actually being in an organization that tries to represent institutions that actually do that engage, our members engage 100 million individuals a year. And so an opportunity to help educate and inform the public and hopefully have them feel like they're a bit more part of the process. So had kind of a few thoughts that kind of building on what you've heard from Karina and Chloe so far, picking up some things that I think provide some particular opportunities. So it was mentioned professional societies, and Chloe highlighted very appropriately like the great work that AAAS has been doing and the opportunity for the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. But they are not the only game in town, and there are other organizations that have sometimes formal programs, but I think even more importantly is those sort of informal opportunities to do things, or fellowships that are much more limited in scope, that are not exactly a job, but an opportunity to, come to Washington or come to the state capitol as a way to practice, and really learn how to be an advocate. So there may be opportunities to join committees, to participate in Hill days and things like that, which for the moment, now that they're virtual, actually make it much more accessible to people who don't have the resources to get on a plane and fly to DC. But it's also in terms of providing content for newsletters and blogs, and nonprofit organizations like professional societies have staff, but they tend not to have as much staff as they need to fulfill things. So when I've been at those organizations, I've been a big fan of engaging the community in doing that. And I've always been a fan of early career folks, or those who have a real passion and interest for this, because they tend to follow through. That passion and interest tends to come through in what they do. And you're able to draw on a diverse community of people who can help provide a whole range of perspectives and ideas that are more than just the one or two people that maybe on a board. Everybody is always interested in volunteers, and in my experience, grad students, postdocs, folks like that tend to, well, not having oodles of time, like the time is a little bit more your own, and the opportunity to participate in things, if you're in the lab, as I see some of you are, doing experiments, and the opportunity to devote some energy to that can be helpful. So that's both the kinds of things that I was talking about through societies, but also opportunities to engage in a variety of public engagement experiences, like were mentioned before, and just the way to engage people who are outside of the scientific community, which is a really essential skill, to figure out how to talk to people who don't really have any clue what you're talking about or why you would care about it. And a way to really help increase the attention to scientific issues more generally. We talk about when we ask people to, contact their member of Congress or their state legislator, and they don't hear from a lot of scientists, because scientists is a relatively small interest group compared to, parents, or, as we've seen with the NRA, gun owners and things like that. But the more that we can educate people who are not scientists about these issues and about why science is important, the better we will do. I think that having this, the pandemic has really lowered the bar for that. I mentioned you don't actually have to get on a plane and fly somewhere. You don't have to take a day off of work to participate, to go to, Sacramento or whatever it is to do this kind of advocacy. The other thing that I've heard is from, maybe Chloe can say whether this is true, but the dynamic is different. If you're working in an office, you're used to having meeting after meeting after meeting with an interested parties all over the map. And it's just a different dynamic. And sometimes there's more opportunity for people to actually focus on you. You're meeting with them virtually, and so they're not in a crowded office hearing from lots of other people. And so sometimes you can actually get more of their attention than you would if you were meeting in person. Another thing that I think is important is that there are a lot of the skills that you get as a scientist, as a student, are really transferable here. But often I find that people have a certain sort of fear of talking to a legislator or somebody like that. But if you're like, oh, they're big and important, they're not going to care what I have to say. They're often fairly early in their careers. They're often people who probably had a certain fear of science, as we know from many people. And so there's a certain kind of awe and respect that they may have from you as somebody who, has this training and maybe a scientific background. And whether that's fair or not, it's something that you can take advantage of. I think back to one of my first experiences in DC. Right after I moved here, I went to a congressional hearing on a report that had been released by the National Academies, the group that I was working with, and just sort of hearing these members of Congress just being so impressed that they had a panel table full of PhDs. And I'm like, well, the kind of science that they did, people have PhDs, like that's just what they are. Like, yes, they are smart and capable, but these elected officials were basically saying, well, you must be really smart because you have this. It was silly, but it provided them sort of an opportunity to sort of build on that and actually have people listen. Even though there's a lot of concern about the place of science in society, polls from Pew Research and others show that actually there has not been a decline in respect for science or for scientists, and so that's a good thing. It's also likely that the people that you're talking to are going to have relatively little background in the kinds of things that you're talking about. If even at the congressional level, there are a few people like Chloe who have backgrounds in science and engineering that are up there, but relatively few do. And I'm guessing that even those who do are asked to be experts in everything that has a vaguely scientific component. And so being able to be a content expert and being able to talk about the things that are most important to you and that you know most about provides you an opportunity to not only educate them, but also to be a resource for them and to be able to say, hey, that this is something that I might be able to help you with, not necessarily me just banging on your door, but here's an opportunity for you to turn to me if you're like looking for more information about something. And that's more true the more local you get. Your local city council member, your local state representative is not going to have staff that are focused on these issues. And so being able to make that connection and being able to not only get your issues on their agenda, but to help them when there are issues that come up that they don't necessarily know about, they don't have anybody on their team who has that expertise to be that resource for them and develop those relationships over time. Maybe I'll stop there and happy to talk more in the discussion.